Hi, in this video I want to make an allusion to a video I made a couple of videos ago, and it has to do with the idea of you can only sense so much and things are intangible and so on and so forth. You can only have a sense, there's no sense of oneness, and I just wanted to use at least maybe an analogy. I'm not sure if it's an analogy or at least an example of that sense, and I may have vaguely mentioned this before in at least a comment somewhere. At least pointing it out to the public as an idea, the idea of consumption and reproduction. I mean, any basic sense that we have of any kind of tangibility of oneness. You have the oneness of having a child between two beings, um, whatever it may be. But yeah, I've mentioned this before, like eating. It's just a mechanical process, doing these things, these intimate things. And a lot of this perception comes from the idea of an inadequate feeling of satisfaction. And let me just qualify this. This is probably mostly just a psychological video. It's nothing more. It's just describing frivolous, superficial nonsense that doesn't really mean much, but I still want to go over it because it is a perception of something that at least exists, and it's a very maybe convincing way to look at reality, or at least convince yourself, because all this stuff does matter, because at least it's a good way to at least manipulate and convince other people, and a lot of emotional arguments can do that, psychological ones, and at least have people understand the frivolous nature of this existence and how there's not much to accomplish except to avoid the negative. And that's part of the, obviously, the process here is avoiding the negative. That's all we're here to do. When I just wanted to use like eating, like the intimate things that we do. I mean, that's almost a way of like looking almost like the more the good that you experience, the more depressing it gets. The realize the good that you can experience. And I've discussed this before, the good that you feel like you can achieve, the good, the come down from that, but realizing the good is very only so much. The good is only avoiding the negative, realizing that even in the moment, and then avoiding that and going back down. And obviously that mixed with the fact that there's only down to go. There's only more room to go down the higher up you are. The idea of that idea mixed with those perceptions, and the only thing that you're going to achieve is these same basic repetitive addictions that you keep satisfying over and over again. And these things are so intangible in such a ways, like I mentioned before, it's a very mechanical thing. It's not even directly interacting with the thing that's causing you to live, the very source of it. Where's the source come from? There's different sources, and all these sources are just as important, but the foundation, the function can be destroyed based on um, a certain way of a certain, my notes is itchy, a certain um, specific point, pinpoint that you, a certain, central nervous system. I don't know if no way describing, double describing exactly what I wanted to, describing the analogy and the thing I wanted to explain at once at the same time, but it does explain the frivolous nature of this existence. And the most intimate things, perception of only a negativity, and the negative once you realize that there's nothing else to accomplish, realizing the only good there is, it's so nice, but you realize that it can only go so far. The limits to things, the linearity to things, the fact that things are very simplistic at their very core. A lot of this stuff has to do with the simplicity. Nothing's touching, atoms are spread apart, photons traveling at the speed of light, almost a matterless material that exists, but makes the foundation of everything that moves. And based on how everything moves, giving it the ability to move, and that's the foundation and the function that creates the things that it makes up based on these certain compounds and molecules, and how it collects up in certain ways and causes things to make up, and causes these distinctions. And these distinctions can cause different things to happen based on other interactions with these molecular structures that interact with each other, and these chemical reactions that happen differently based on these different structures that are built off of them. So it's a psychological slash philosophical slash scientific kind of video, and I guess mixing these three ideas. You shouldn't, but it's about transitioning through those ideas, and that's what I'm trying to do, is transition through those ideas, going from one and not implementing too much of the psychology into the philosophy, and the philosophy into the science, and so on and so forth, or at least the psychological or the scientific ideas that have been at least very well proven to exist anyway. But yeah, I mean, like the whole eating thing, intimacy, a lot of this has to do with realizing that the good is only so good and it can only go so far, and it doesn't really mean anything. It's a very superficial good that you're experiencing, and realizing that it can only go so far, and you realize the things that you once found beautiful, like I mentioned, are nothing more than a black space in the blackness, a black wall, a wall, whatever the wall may be. It's whiteness. You don't see any, you don't have any sense of depth behind a veiling of a uh, of a fence, or a door that you can see tiny holes through. Whatever, I can't think of the name, but it's like seeing through tiny holes. Like you could see the darkness, but you can only see so much. There's hope, but you don't know what's behind it, but you could get a general idea. But you can only get so much of an idea. A screen door, like a screen door. And that's, I think, an example I used, or a fence. Looking through the holes, you can only get a vague sense of what it looks like. But you can see it. But once you realize, you look past it, there's nothing but a blank wall behind it. And that's a wall directly behind it. You could probably stick your finger right into it and you could touch it. There's nothing behind there. You get a sense, you feel like there is, but there's nothing. There's not a whole world behind it. It's very vague, vagary based on a misperception of the truth that's behind the wall. There's nothing more. The vague sense of the sunset in the background. There's always a distance. There's always a wall in which seemingly it seems to create a boundary, or there's a very intangible, close feeling that you can never really feel that in sunset. You can only sense it based on your senses. But I guess it's almost like taking your psychology too far and having too much of an expectation. And almost, I guess, it's almost begging the question of how depressed the person may be, realizing that how much of this oneness or this tangibility that you need to rely on to feel like you're actually um, interacting with an environment and feeling satisfied, feeling a very strong sense of dissatisfaction mixed with a misperception and a very strong depression or whatever it may be. Well, these things are real and these things exist, and it's about understanding these things and convincing people. And that's both the idea, using these almost in a way psychological perceptions and ideas and arguments to convince people that this game isn't really worth playing when you realize all the good you have is very superficial. And there's no way to do it. And then once you know the truth, I mean, it's almost synonymous truth with depression, realizing that there is nothing. And that's almost going to say truth, depression leads to depression, depression leads to truth, and so on and so forth. And a positive feedback loop of a continuous nature. And it's almost like saying, well, you're depressed. Well, you can say you're too happy. And you don't realize, am I being too depressed? Am I not looking at things right? Am I doing things right? I don't know. I perceive it this way. I don't know. I look outside myself. I see something completely different. And other people, and I look at myself, am I doing it differently? Then you ignore the fact that they do the exact same thing as you in many ways. At least in many ways, not all the ways, but in many ways. Obviously, there's differences, and more differences are more extreme or less extreme, but it's the extreme, it's up or down, there's more pain or less pain. They're doing things very similar to you, regardless of your perception. It's just you happen to be suffering more or suffering less based on those interactions. You ignore all the interactions that you have in common, and you look at all the interactions that you feel insecure about, and or you're insecure about, and those things happen to disregard or make you not think or remember the fact that you do have those similarities in common. They have a different haircut. They look more cliche than you, and all of a sudden you can't take them seriously. That's something I have to deal with. I guess it's an egotistical problem, but it's also a recognition of the truth that, yeah, you look the same as everyone else. Yeah, it's anyway. Getting out that kind of frustration, I guess. Let you know, hipsters out there. But anyway, yeah, the basic idea is very intangibility, even the most intimate things, but the most intimate things, like the religion thing, making those comparisons, are the thing in the foundation for which creates those ideas to begin with. And if you eliminate those things, you realize that there's not so much to worry about. Sort of like relying on a very strong sexual function and then feeling depressed after you've leaked. You realize that maybe it doesn't have to be that way. It's your psychology to begin with, and you can eliminate that sense by not being so indulgent in that psychology, and realizing that there doesn't have to be more, but living in the grace of the existence that you're living in now, and it doesn't have to be so wonderful in the end. But regardless, there is a sense of intangibility, physical mechanical disconnection based on a and also a psychological disconnection based on those physical disconnections of really feeling dissatisfied, not realizing it's almost being driven by the fact that the addiction is so strong that you realize you can't satisfy the addiction to the extreme that you want at least, or the perception that there's something grandiose out there beyond the sunset. In reality, there's just more space to be filled by the same mechanical function beyond the sunset. There's nothing more. And before long, you're going to reach an end, and that end is not going to be anything more than just an end, a wall of blankness for which there is nothing more to deal with. Then you're right back to looking back behind you, and you see the sunset. And this is the sunset's in the middle, and you're going to cross the sunset again, and you're going to wonder, okay, well, what's that? Or you see the golden fruit, or you see the oasis, and you walk on, okay, let's continue. Then you realize there's nothing, and you walk back, oh, the oasis is so far away, but it looks so, it glows in the light, and I feel like there's something beyond it. You just keep falling for the same behind the curtain syndrome over and over again. And so there's really not much you accomplish. It's the same old addictions, same old things to be falling for, nothing more, nothing less. But yeah, that's the basic idea. There's nothing here, really. Every satisfaction relies on a very mechanical, baseless function that doesn't have anything but based on the addiction that was given based on our biology that was allowed. Doesn't mean it's right. It just means we're falling for the addiction. Doesn't mean it's anything more. And it's avoiding the negative, and the things that we find as satisfying our negatives are very superficial. Not only are they superficial, but they don't accomplish anything, and they're almost intangible in their presence. Eating, satisfying a desire that way, enjoying it. Just a swallowing, chewing, think about the very mechanical thing. It's sex, thrusting in and out. I mean, I've mentioned this stuff in passing before in other videos as well. I mean, very mechanical. It's not anything. You can easily change the X, Y, the things that are identifying the X and Y, and just change. Instead of vagina, you have hand, or just instead of meat, you have pasta or bread. I mean, you just change the variables, and it's just the same thing. It doesn't matter what it is, and it's just serving a basic function. And it's very mechanical, and you're not really doing anything but or and you're just doing the very mechanical function. You're absorbing nutrients. You're fertilizing an egg. There's an end thing that's causing an interaction, but the basic function that's causing that is very mechanical, and it can be changed, and you can artificially inseminate now. You don't even need to have sex to have a child, which you shouldn't do. I wouldn't advocate that. I would advocate against it as best you can. Try not to have a child, please, for me, for everyone. We have enough people, but I think that's not enough of an argument. I think we have too many people. I think more than one's enough. More than one is way too much. But anyway, that's really all I have to say. There's nothing here. Very mechanical. You can change those things. That's like mentioning the changeability thing that I mentioned before. It's very changeable, and that's almost like the idea, like a more complete sense of the idea of connecting these ideas and realize, oh, this is where I'm going with it, based on two different ideas I haven't really connected too well. And that's what part of these videos is, connecting these ideas, because I just start off with a basic idea and I try to go from there with these ideas, because they're just baseless. Say, okay, where am I going to go? I have a basic idea, I need to write it down. That's why there's changing of subjects a lot, but I'm trying my best to at least get the basic idea down and try to reach logical conclusions. And that's what I'm doing. At least I'm trying my best to do that. So regardless, that's the basic idea. Changeable doesn't have much meaning. It's very intangible. It can be changed. Even if you can touch it, it can be changed easily, and it doesn't really need that. It's just about receiving it in function that's going to happen anyway that doesn't need to happen, based on motivations and addictions that are right, wrong, whatever this may be. It's based on intuition of what you expect to be right or wrong, based on things that you know. And the only real right thing to do is eliminate the thing causing the ability to have this kind of issue to begin with, and that's pulling the roots out of the ability for life, the game, to perpetuate itself for no good reason. And that's the only function based on this really silly, stupid mechanism of procreation based on sentience, and allowing those kinds of things to happen over and over again. So there's no real function to it. It's a pointless function that doesn't need to exist. So that's the basic idea. And there's nothing really else to mention. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing really here. Anyway, I don't want to be too much depressing. I don't want to talk myself into a severe depression right now, so I'm going to avoid talking anymore on the subject. So thank you, and if I have anything else to say on the subject, thank you, and until next time.